It's time to get super spooky here on That Shakespeare Life, just in time for Halloween, which is less than 1 week away. Be warned up front this week, though, that today's episode delves into some real history, and we're going to talk about subjects like murder, cannibalism, and real people who were convicted of being werewolves in the 16th century. That's right. If you don't like the dark and macabre, then turn away now. I have tons of great alternatives that are lighter, brighter, and don't involve spooky tales, all linked below this video if you'd like some lighter fare to delve into your history. But if you'd like to know about the werewolf of Dole that attacked England in 1573, then keep watching because that's what's happening right now on That Shakespeare Life. If you're new to the channel, I'm Cassidy Cash. I'm the host of That Shakespeare Life, and each week we delve into the history of the real life of William Shakespeare, and we look at what was going on when he was alive between 1564 and 1616. This section of history was full of all kinds of superstitions and magic and just scary, spiritual, everything you could think of all mushed in there together. They were changing religions and they were mixing it all up with a budding new genre of science. And what it created was a time when people not only had an established belief in things like werewolves, but there were actually multiple documented court cases of people who were tried and ultimately determined to be real living werewolves. There was Peter Stoop in 1589, and then a Geneva man was convicted of killing 16 children by apparently changing himself into a wolf on October 15th of 1580. That story happened when Shakespeare was 16 years old, and these are just two of multiple stories that you can find from Shakespeare's lifetime where people were convicted of being werewolves in this way. One of the ones I wanted to share with you today happened when Shakespeare was only 9 years old, and I have to think the tale probably sent shivers down not only his spine, but that of his mother, since the victims of these werewolf crimes were typically children. In 1573, a man named Giles Garnier was convicted officially in a court of law of being a werewolf. It's my understanding that Giles Garnier may have actually believed himself to be a werewolf, but his crimes were so gruesome he earned the official moniker for himself, known as the Werewolf of Dole. Now, arguably, Giles Garnier qualifies as what we would consider a serial killer today. And I say arguably because the definition of what makes a serial killer has been defined by psychologists and official organizations like the FBI or others. They put boundaries around what gets included in these kinds of categories that might not match up completely with what Giles Garnier did. But Giles Garnier did murder multiple people, and his case captivated the culture of Shakespeare's day. To find out more about this story and exactly how his case worked and what it looked like to convict someone of being a werewolf in the 16th century, I sat down with the author of the book Werewolves, Witches, and Wandering Spirits. Dr. Kay Edwards is here on the show this week, and here's what she had to say about this case. In 1573, Giles Garnier was convicted of being a werewolf and even became known as the Werewolf of Dole. Kay, this
Right.
moniker sounds like names we give serial killers today. Was Giles Garnier a serial killer, and what can you tell us about his case?
Was Garnier a serial killer? Not in the sense if you really study how modern serial killers work, and the psychology involved and things like that. One of the most fascinating things I ever did is the person who was in charge of the FBI serial killer, I don't know what you want to call it, branch, office, etc., spoke at the school I first worked at. And it was fascinating to compare his statements about how this works and how they study it versus cases like this. Guy Garnier was a mass murderer, as far as we can tell. Gilles Garnier, I'll just call him Guy because it's easier for English speakers, was a sensational case in a place that very much felt that werewolves or wolves in general were all over. But the thing you have to understand about the Franche-Comté at that time is it is an area where there are an enormous number of religious differences. It was a migration area for Protestants going through to Geneva, but it was also an ultra-Catholic area. It was an area where the government was very, very much disputed. It was almost semi-autonomous region. It wasn't a particularly wealthy region. It was very much tied to kind of basic subsistence agriculture and kind of transhumanists. So you've got, various people doing cattle or sheep or goats traveling all over the mountains, the Jura Mountains, that were to the east of the province. Wolves were a real issue, whether they were werewolves or regular ordinary wolves. And so there's, Guy Garnier, who, as far as we can tell, was to some degree mentally deficient. And they said this at the time. That's actually their term for it. We don't know exactly in what way he was not thinking in the same way or at the same level of people from the time. But when he was first brought in and put into a monastery kind of for the protection of society, it was actually considered a kind of generous thing because it was for his protection as well, because they truly weren't sure what he was going to do. He was, he wasn't entirely, he didn't really seem to comprehend what was going on.
In our complete podcast interview with Dr. Edwards, we talk some more about the other cases of werewolves from Shakespeare's lifetime, along with a specific medical condition known as hypertrichosis. This is where the human body grows hair absolutely everywhere in abundant amounts. And it creates that look that you know of as a werewolf today. If you have this mental image of, Boris Karloff or other kind of Hollywood images of a werewolf, this is a real medical condition that could cause someone to look that way. It existed in Shakespeare's lifetime, and we touch on that in this episode. We also talk about the specific cases I mentioned earlier, like Peter Stoop in the 1580s, and even the influence of works like James I wrote his whole book called Demonology, and we talk about how those kinds of publications were influencing public thought around, werewolves and sort of scary creatures from Shakespeare's lifetime. You can hear the entire conversations right now at CassidyCash.com/episode 289. We actually have another podcast episode specifically on hypertrichosis. If you're interested in that, we talk about that medical condition from Shakespeare's lifetime in an additional podcast episode. I'll link that one below this episode as well. And if you'd really like to go in depth and connect with some other historians that love looking at the period artifacts, woodcuts, primary documents, and all these things related to werewolves and other spooky things from Shakespeare's England, then I'd invite you to be a member of That Shakespeare Life. We go behind the episode and really dive deep into the extras of the conversations on the show. These are available for members, and the link for that is also on our podcast page. So you can find that at CassidyCash.com/episode 289. And if you are more of a clickable person than a writable person, I'll place that link below the video as well. So all you got to do is click on it to go there. Once you're on the podcast page, just click Access the Extras to find the members' content. So that's your solid dose of spooky and scary for this year's Halloween season. Thank you for watching. I think this is fun, albeit scary stories, but they're pretty cool that this stuff was going on in Shakespeare's lifetime, and it's exciting to learn more. It's especially, that's not right, especially exciting to learn more with you. So thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.